السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Inshallah, today we're going to be speaking about the leadership of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, which we began the previous lesson or the lesson before that. And as mentioned, we're going to be speaking about the leadership of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu and focusing on the conquests of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, especially with regards to the general of the Muslim army, one of the greatest generals in history, in fact, undefeated. He had never lost a battle in his life. In any battle he was involved in, before Islam and after Islam, he was known as the sword of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ called him one of the swords of Allah unleashed against the disbelievers. And this is, of course, Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anhu, the sword of Allah, Sayfullah, Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anhu. And Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, just to give you some ideas and perspectives that we did mention last time, but we'll remind ourselves again. He was essentially dealing with rebels who had left Islam, those who had left Islam, the murtads. There were revolts taking place, people who refused to give zakah. Some people had left Islam completely. Some had followed other false prophets such as Musaylama and others. And these were separate groups of people, either following tribes or just, deciding to leave Islam. And he had to deal with each one of these groups. On top of this, you had others who were trying to see if they could attack Mecca, or more specifically Medina and the Islamic empire, because of the weakness, especially after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. And what did Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu do? Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu sent multiple armies to tackle and to fight and engage in combat each of these groups that were leaving Islam, or they were a threat to Islam, or they were following their own prophets or messengers, the false prophets. In total, he had 11 armies. So a separate army going one place, another army going somewhere else, another army going somewhere else. And he was managing all of these 11 armies. And sometimes these 11 armies, they would maybe meet, one army would meet with another army, like a regiment, you could say, or a group of soldiers. They would meet with another army, and they would combine to fight specific people in a specific land, and then they would break apart again and go on with their missions as given to them by Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. Now this is very, very impressive. Why is it so impressive? Because in those days, forget those days, even these days, for a person to manage 11 armies simultaneously all at once is a huge feat. In those days, there's no direct way of communicating. You don't have mobile phones, there's no emails, there's no, the fastest thing is a letter. And that would have to be sent by a messenger. There's no airplanes or trains taking those letters. And also on top of this, there's no screen in front of him, like video games today, where you can see how much your army is conquered and where your army is going and what they're doing and who they're attacking, etc. He has to rely on his own mind to be able to figure out where each army is, where they're going, where they are at the moment, how many people are in the army, threats which they may be facing, all at the same time. The terrain, the people. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu had to have extensive knowledge of the people and the terrain and where they're going, and it's all in his mind. Even maps, Allah knows best. It doesn't seem like they actually had physical maps. Maybe they did, Allah knows best. But the point is, even in those circumstances with maps, it's still such a huge feat. It really shows us the leadership skills of the Khalifa Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, and being able to multitask and manage all of these armies at the same time. And we mentioned that there were people who had ended up following false prophets and false messengers. And there were actually a few of them. There was even a female prophet. She called herself Sajjah, a false prophet claiming to be a prophet. She was a sorceress. Her name was Sajjah. Then you had others. You had somebody by the name of Aswad al-Ansi. Aswad al-Ansi, he was also somebody who claimed a prophethood, and people from his tribe, they would basically join him. Normally what would happen is, if somebody claimed to be a prophet or a messenger, then these people, by the way, they were Muslim. So Musaylama was also a Muslim. They left Islam and they became false prophets just for power and for greed. And so normally when that happened, their tribe would show loyalty to them. Their tribe would show loyalty to them because he's from their tribe. And so it was this asabiyya, qabaliyya, this tribal loyalty and bias that they had, that they would end up following those prophets and messengers that were false, even when they knew they were false. And there's an interesting story of somebody approaching Musaylama, and he said, "Tell me some of the verses which you have been given." And he recited some verses, and the companion, he said, "You know that I know that you're lying." Meaning it's so clear that you're a liar, like I don't even have to tell you. And some of these verses that they would come up with, it's laughable. You'd hear it and you think this is ridiculous. Musaylama, he would say, he would ask somebody, "What has your prophet been given?" And they would say, "Surah Fil." And he would say, "I have also been given a surah called Surah Fil." And he would recite, and he would say, "Al-Fil, wa ma adraka mal-Fil, lahu dhanbun wabil, wa lahu khurtumun tawil." This was his Surah Fil. Al-Fil, mal-Fil, wa ma adraka mal-Fil. The elephant, what makes you know what the elephant is? It has a small tail and it has a long trunk. And this was his Surah Fil. And so people knew he wasn't a prophet, but because he was from their tribe, they would just end up following him. And as we said, Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu an was from the greatest generals in Islamic history. And of course, he was the individual at the Battle of Uhud who flanked the Muslims from behind Archer's Mount and attacked from the rear of the Muslims, causing confusion, which led to the defeat of the Muslims. And Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu an, after the hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ, after the Battle of Uhud, the Battle of the Trench, he was also engaged in, but there wasn't much battle taking place because of the trench which was dug by the Muslims. And before the conquest of Mecca, Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu an, along with others such as Amr ibn al-As and others, they left and they went to Medina and they became Muslim, because Khalid realizing what's happening and the political climate, the geopolitical climate at the time, and the amount of people that are accepting Islam and the numbers of Quraysh that are worshipping idols, and this idol worship is just not. He could see, he was an intelligent person. He could see that this was something which was not going to last, and the Muslims were getting the upper hand. And so he became Muslim. His brother was already a Muslim before him, and he would send letters to him asking him, "Why don't you become Muslim?" And the Prophet ﷺ himself would say, what a good man he is. Somebody like Khalid shouldn't be a disbeliever. Someone the likes of Khalid should be a Muslim. This is a praise for Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu an. So Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu an becomes a Muslim, and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu an makes him the commander of the Muslim army. And he is sent to fight Musaylama al-Kadhab in Yamama. And Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu an, as we know, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu an would praise him because of his status as a fighter and as a general. And Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu an would say, "Women will no longer be able to give birth to the likes of Khalid ibn Walid." Like, this person, he's one of a kind. So numerous people were sent to Yamama to fight Musaylama al-Kadhab. One of them was another Muslim general by the name of Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl. Ikrimah ibn Jahl radiallahu an had become Muslim, but in the early days of Islam, he wasn't a Muslim. So at the Battle of Badr, of course, his father Abu Jahl was the leader of the Mushrikeen in Mecca, and his father was killed, and Ikrimah was fighting against the Muslims in subsequent battles after the Battle of Badr. And at the conquest of Mecca, Ikrimah escaped because he was afraid of being punished by the Muslims because of his involvement in battles and trying to kill the Muslims in battles. And eventually he becomes a Muslim. He accepts Islam, returns back to Medina, and in the lifetime of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh, he's been given the responsibility of being the leader of one of the armies. And he is sent to Yamama. Abu Bakr radiallahu anh tells Ikrimah radiallahu anh, "Don't attack, just wait for me." Or wait for my orders, because the plan was to send Khalid radiallahu anhu with his army so they could join forces and fight Musaylim al-Kadhab and fight his tribe. His tribe was called the Banu Hanifa tribe. Musaylimah's tribe was called Banu Hanifa. And Banu Hanifa, they were known for their skills in battle. Like, they were serious warriors. They were experts in warfare. In fact, Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu later says that the most severest battles that I was ever involved in was with Banu Hanifa, with Musaylimah's tribe. He says, I was engaged in this battle and I felt like I was going to die. And he said, I was inflicted with more wounds in that battle than in any other battle. So Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu is on his way. Ikrimah radiallahu anhu is waiting. And Ikrimah radiallahu anhu, he's a general, he's a fighter, he's a soldier. He's been told to wait. Khalid ibn Walid is engaged in other fights, in other battles elsewhere. And Ikrimah radiallahu anhu becomes restless. He's just waiting, he's not fighting, and it's in his blood to be a soldier and to fight. And so he decides that he wants to attack Musaylimah. So this is going against the instructions of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. So he tries to attack and he's defeated. The army loses lots of men, and a letter is sent back to Abu Bakr radiallahu an that the army was engaged in battle led by Ikrimah, and they lost. Ikrimah didn't die in the battle, he survived. And Abu Bakr radiallahu an was furious because it was a clear it was going in clear contradiction to the commands that Abu Bakr radiallahu an had given to Ikrimah radiallahu an, not to engage in the battle, not to fight. And so Ikrimah is told, go and join another army elsewhere, and I'm going to send Khalid ibn Walid, and he's going to engage with Musaylimah in battle. So Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu an arrives in Yamama, and the apostates are also advancing in Yamama, and this is basically almost like the headquarters or the main place where the Banu Hanifa would be. This is their place. Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu an, he's marching with his army. Musaylimah is also marching with his army, and Khalid ibn Walid wants to be the first one to set up his army. He wants to dictate where he's going to have his army, where the army is going to be, because then you have the upper hand. If you set up your army, then the opposition has no choice except to find the second best place to set up their army so that they can fight the enemy in battle. And so Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anh found a place which had higher ground. So he had an advantage. He was able to see the whole army of Musaylimah al-Kadhab. And by the way, Musaylimah was called Musaylimah al-Kadhab, Musaylimah the liar. It said that he sent a letter to the Prophet ﷺ because he became a murtad and he apostated in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ. And he sent a letter to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, to Muhammad the Messenger of Allah, from Musaylimah the Messenger of Allah. And he said, verily Allah has divided the land into two. Half is for you and half is for me. Meaning, let's make a deal. Half is for you, you can have whatever you can have, and I'll have whatever I have. Again, it's this power. There's no, nothing for Allah here. He's just greedy and he's selfish. He wants power, he wants wealth. So the Prophet ﷺ sent a letter back and said, from Muhammad the Messenger of Allah to Musaylimah al-Kadhab, to Musaylimah the liar. Verily the earth belongs to Allah and He gives it to whomsoever He wishes. Inna al-arda lillahi yu'tihi man yasha. It's an ayah from the Quran. So Musaylimah was called Al-Kadhab, and that name basically is stuck from that time to describe Musaylimah befittingly, because of course he was somebody who left Islam and he apostated and claimed to be a messenger and prophet himself. So a very powerful tribe, Banu Hanifa, they end up camping, and Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu an ends up facing the enemy in battle. And there are many respected companions in this battle. You have, for example, Ammar ibn Yasir radiallahu an. Ammar ibn Yasir, the great companion whose father was one of the first shuhada. And you had other companions of the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam. You had Zayd ibn al-Khattab, the older brother of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu an. In fact, Zayd was a Muslim before Umar was. And he was the older brother of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu an. And you had other respected companions of the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam. You also had Wahshi. Wahshi, who was Wahshi? The one who killed Hamza, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, at the Battle of Uhud. And Wahshi eventually did become Muslim. And when he came to the Prophet ﷺ, he was afraid he was going to be killed at the conquest of Mecca. And he disguised himself. And he went in front of the Prophet ﷺ, uncovered his face and gave the Shahada straight away, before they could do anything. So he became Muslim. And the Prophet ﷺ told him, describe to me how you killed Hamza, my uncle. And Wahshi described what he did. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, if you ever see me walking, don't come in front of me. Because every time I'm going to see you, it's going to remind me of how you killed my uncle. And so he was given this the very difficult command from the Prophet ﷺ of always having to avoid him. And subhanAllah, can you imagine this kind of command being given to you from the Messenger of Allah ﷺ? So Wahshi, he is also at this battle. And he, in a way, wants redemption for what he did to the uncle of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. And of course, after the Prophet ﷺ died, he was still in Medina, and then he joined the army that was going to fight the Murtads, because he didn't, of course, leave Islam. And he was with Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu an, and his goal was to kill Musaylama. Just like he had that goal initially to kill Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, his goal was, the only thing on his mind was to kill Musaylama al-Kadhab. His intention was to kill Musaylama al-Kadhab, hoping to make up for what he did at the Battle of Uhud. And if you look at the numbers, it's said that the apostates had around 40,000 and the Muslims had roughly 12,000 or 13,000. So 13,000 versus 40,000. And you'll notice this is the case many times throughout Islamic history, especially in the early days of Islam, where the Muslims were always a minority. In fact, some narrations and some researchers and sources, they say that the Murtads were up to 100,000. This is a more modest figure, 40,000. But this is quite common. You'll find the Muslims were always lower in number than the disbelievers. And of course, their iman, their trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah aids the Muslims when they're in battle against numbers which are higher than them. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helped the Muslims at the Battle of Badr, when Allah helped the Muslims in other examples, the angels themselves would fight along with the Muslims at the battles. And this is, of course, a sign of truth. It's a sign of the truth being on the side of the Muslims and on the side of Islam. So you had around 40,000 versus 13,000. And Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu set up a tent where they would be behind the army itself. You would have the headquarters, the tent, where you may have the women, you will have the food, you'll have the horses, the camels, and the stables, etc. And that was set up behind the actual army itself. And when the battle begins, as a result of the Murtads having defeated Ikrimah, they had already been encouraged. So they were a bit more confident than before. In fact, much more confident than before because of this defeat that they had inflicted on the Muslims, with Ikrimah being the leader of that army. And so when the battle starts, the Muslims are slowly retreating, meaning they're actually losing the battle initially. And Musaylama and his soldiers, they're actually advancing and they're getting closer and closer to the tents of the Prophet, of the Muslims of Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu. And they actually end up going into the area where the women are, where the camels and horses are. That's how far they end up going. And they say that some of the people from the apostate army, from Musaylama's army, they actually became distracted and they just decided to start taking, spoils of war and war booty. So they would take the horses, camels, and they would take other things. It's also said that one of them entered the tent of Khalid ibn Walid himself, and there was a woman there. And he was about to kill the woman, and somebody prevented him from killing the woman. But this is basically how far into the enemy camp, the camp of the Muslims, they had actually gotten into. And Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu an kept on fighting the army of Musaylama, and he ensured that the army of the Muslims was regimented and organized, very structured, meaning they didn't panic. And he was able to retreat and go behind the enemy again, and they kept their form and they kept their composure, and slowly but surely they were able to push away the army of Musaylama and pushing them further and further away. And there are many examples of the bravery of some of the companions of the Messenger of Allah والسلام, and some of the soldiers in that war and the things that they did. There's an interesting story of a companion by the name of Abu Aqeel. So same as my namesake, Abu Aqeel. It said that he was from the Ansar and he had been injured to the extent where all of his left side was not basically functioning. So some sort of paralysis because of injuries in battle. And as they were being overcome by the army of Musaylama, there were shouts from the Muslims, Ya Ma'shar al-Ansar, O people of the Ansar, let's continue fighting, let's advance, and let's fight back. And he hears this call, and he's from the Ansar. And so he tries to stand up. Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, Abdullah ibn Umar, by the way, is also in this battle. Abdullah ibn Umar, he says, you need to sit down, like, where are you going? What are you doing? You can't get up, you're not in any state to get up and fight. He says, but they call my name. And he says, I don't recall them saying your name. He says, did you hear them say, oh, people of the Ansar? And I am from the Ansar. And I'm going to go and join them because I want to help the Ansar because I am from the Ansar. And so he stands up with much difficulty and takes his sword and he goes out and he starts to fight alongside the Muslims, even though half of his body is basically paralyzed. And he becomes a shaheed in that battle. Another interesting story mentions a companion by the name of Thabit ibn Qais. Thabit ibn Qais. Thabit ibn Qais becomes a shaheed at this battle, and later on, another individual, another companion has a dream, and he sees Thabit ibn Qais in this dream. And in this dream, Thabit ibn Qais is talking to him, and he tells him, when I became a shaheed, someone took a very expensive piece of equipment that was on me, like part of my armor. It was very valuable. So go to him, he's in this place, go to him and find him and take it back and go to Medina and give it as payment for a debt which I have. And I have money, give this money to this and such person. He's giving inheritance instructions to somebody in his dream after he's passed away. So this companion, he wakes up, he goes to Khalid al-Walid, tells him what happened. They go to look for this armor, this expensive armor that was taken from him in battle by another Muslim, and they find it, they take it, and they go to Medina, and they find out that he did indeed have a debt of somebody, and so they pay off the debt, and then inheritance. Abu Bakr radiallahu anh is told about the story and about the dream, and Abu Bakr radiallahu anh does what Thabit told the man to do with regards to inheritance and with regards to what to do with some of the money that was left behind. And this is the only time in Islamic history that scholars say that a judgment inheritance was given after the person died and based on a dream that somebody had of an individual. And of course, this is from the blessing and barakah and the miraculous things which took place in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ and the lifetime of the companions of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. And this is from the blessings that the companions would have because of their obedience to Allah and the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. And there are other examples of the bravery of the companions at the Battle of Badr and the fighters at the Battle of Badr. And the fighting became more and more severe. Wahshi, as we mentioned, was looking for Musaylama. He eventually notices Musaylama. So he's just walking around, trying to see if he can find Musaylama. Eventually he finds Musaylama. And there was another very famous companion who was known for warfare. His name was Abu Dujana. Abu Dujana was a very famous warrior. He was also at the Battle of Badr. He was in other battles in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And Abu Dujana at the same time notices Musaylama. And as he's approaching Musaylama to kill him, Wahshi sees Musaylama and throws a spear, and it goes at the back of Musaylama into his back and comes out the other end. And Abu Dujana, as soon as this happens, Abu Dujana strikes with his sword and strikes Musaylama, and Musaylama falls on the floor. And a woman is watching from a shack or a hut on the second floor of this small building. And she sees Musaylama being killed. And she says, the black one has killed Musaylama, meaning Al-Wahshi. And so when they were differing about who had killed Musaylama, was it Abu Dujana, was it Wahshi, they realized it was actually Wahshi, the spear, and him throwing the spear at Musaylama was the thing that caused Musaylama to be killed and caused him to die. And they say Wahshi, after this, he said that nothing made up for what I did to the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ until I killed Musaylama. That's when I felt like I had made up for that deed that I did and killing Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib radiallahu anhu. Of course, Wahshi became Muslim, and his past sins were forgiven. But sometimes a person does things and he regrets certain things that he does and he wants to make up for them. And so he said, I felt like I didn't make up for it until I had killed Musaylama. And the people started to retreat. And there was somebody who was from the close aides or second in command of Musaylama. Musaylama has not been killed. So the second in command, he tries to rally the troops and he says to the garden, go to the garden. And the garden was fortified with a wall. It was like a fortified area of this place where they were having this battle. And fighting, by the way, became so severe in this area, this fortified area, which was called a garden in those days, that the area became known as the Garden of Death, Hadiqatul Maut. It became known as the Garden of Death. So they basically fortified themselves, barricaded themselves in this area. Okay, like it was like a farm garden kind of place. And the companions, the Muslim army, Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu an, they go there, they can't seem to penetrate. They don't know what to do. And so one of the companions, he tells Khalid ibn Walid and tells the other companions, take a shield and let me go in the shield and throw me up and throw me on the other side of the wall. And I'll open the door from the inside. And basically, he's risking his life. He's risking his life so that he can help the Muslims. So they put him on a big shield and they throw him over. And the people on the other side see this person flying towards them from over the wall, probably thinking how did he even jump over this wall? He flies over the wall and starts attacking anyone who tries to attack him, makes his way to the door, and obviously they're all trying to stop him from opening the door, and he manages to open the door, and when he opens the door, they all rush in. And it's said that this companion had 80 wounds on his body, and he survived. They say Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu an, he would continuously visit him every day to make sure that he was getting better, and he would treat him, and he would basically look after him as a sign of respect for what he did, the sacrifice he made, going over the wall itself. And so they entered into the garden, and it was, as we said, the place was called the Garden of Death. They say the ground had turned red because of the amount of people that were killed. In total, around 10,000 of the army of Musaylama were killed. 10,000 in total. Many of them in this place, in the Garden of Death. And around 1,200 of the Muslims were killed. And there were many Huffaz who were also fighting in this battle. And they were encouraging each other to recite Quran prior to the battle beginning, and even in the battle itself. SubhanAllah, can you imagine being in a battle where you could potentially die, but then you're being reminded to recite Quran and to recite the Book of Allah in that situation. You can only imagine what it must have been like for these companions and the bravery and the courage of these companions. And many of these, they say there were around 1,000 Huffaz of the Quran who were involved in this battle. And they say around half of them were killed in this battle alone. Half of the Huffaz that were in this battle were killed, around 500 of them. And when news came to Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh, that this many of the Huffaz had been killed, he started to cry. And he went to Abu Bakr radiallahu anh and gave his famous suggestion. What was his famous suggestion, which we'll talk about next time, inshallah? To compile the Quran, the compilation of the Quran. It was as a result of, one of the reasons was, as a result of many of the Huffaz, or the main reason in fact, many of the Huffaz being killed in battle. And there was a fear, that many of the Huffaz are dying, we're going to lose the Quran, so we need to compile it. And eventually that advice was taken on board by Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh, and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq appointed Zayd ibn Thabit radiallahu anh to be the leader, or to be the one in charge of compiling the Mus'haf, the first ever Mus'haf of Islam. So this battle was a victory for the Muslims. As we said, 10,000 were killed on the side of the apostates. Another incident is also mentioned of one of the close aides of Musaylama by the name of Muja'a being with Musaylama. Muja'a, interesting also, because he became Muslim at the hands of the Prophet ﷺ, just like Musaylama. And then he left Islam and joined Musaylama, just like Musaylama. And he was his close aide, like his right-hand man, if you like. And it's said that Musaylama had sent a small contingent of the army to scout and to find the Muslim army, and they fell asleep. They were camping and they fell asleep, and some of the Muslims came across them, and they were all fast asleep, in deep sleep. They had no idea what was going on. And so when they woke up, they realized that they'd been caught and they'd been surrounded. Khalid ibn Walid decided to kill them all because they were soldiers in battle. He executed them. And some of the people suggested to Khalid radiallahu anh not to kill this person, Muja'a. And people had heard of Muja'a. He was somebody who had accepted Islam at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. He was somebody who was well known. And so Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anh decided to leave him, not to kill him, to use him as somebody who can guide the Muslims and see what they can do, where they can go, where Musaylama's army might be, use him for information, etc. And so he kept him, and he looked after him, took care of him. He was a prisoner, he was taken care of, he was fed, and he was taken care of very well by the wife of Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu himself, or herself. So after the battle, many of the apostates end up scattering here and there. Small armies are sent out to find them and to kill them. And then the Muslims advance into Yamama. They make their way towards Yamama. And this battle is called the Battle of Yamama, by the way. So they're making their way to the city itself. Muja'a says to Khalid, why don't you let me go and negotiate on your behalf? And Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anh thinks, okay, well, some of them have disbanded, they've gone here and there. Maybe I'll put him to use and he can go and negotiate with them, and he can act like maybe he can bring some sort of treaty or some kind of peace or whatever. He can do some sort of negotiations. So Muja'a goes to the city, and the city is empty. There's not that many people left. There are elderly, there's women, there's children, and there's a few people who didn't go to the battle for whatever reason. So Muja'a tells them, he says, put on armor. Put armor on, put helmets on, shields, wear shields and swords, and stand outside of the city. So, and there's lots of them, there's women and children, elderly. So they stand outside of the city. Khalid ibn Walid sees them, and it looks like there's a huge amount of, like thousands of them. And he's thinking they're soldiers, but they're not really soldiers. From a distance you can't tell. They're just women and children and elderly people dressed as soldiers. So Muja'a is basically tricking the Muslims into thinking that this is an army and they're still prepared for war and that they can fight back. So he's playing both sides in a way. And he comes back to Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anh and says, they want to negotiate a peace treaty, etc. Khalid ibn Walid says, we're not going to have peace because from his perspective, they look like soldiers. And Muja'a says, well, if you don't want peace, then they're going to fight. And Khalid ibn Walid is thinking, we just finished fighting the battle at Yamama, we've killed Musaylama, and now they're going to end up fighting another battle. So he says, okay, what are the terms, etc. And they agree on terms. And then Khalid ibn Walid makes his way into the city with the army, and he notices there's no men there. He realizes it was just women and children. So he turns to Mujah and he says, you deceived me. Like you tricked me. And Mujah, he says, إِنَّهُمْ قَوْمِي. They're my people. Like, I was just doing whatever I could to protect my people. And so the peace treaty is signed. Some say we need to execute them and kill them for what they've done. It's deception. It's based on deception. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu hears the news and says the treaty was made. We stick to the treaty now because it was done. So what's done is done now, and there won't be any more fighting. So this was the story of Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anhu and the Battle of Yamama. After the victory at the Battle of Yamama, almost instantly a message comes from Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh telling Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anh to make his way to Iraq to fight in Iraq. Like almost like straight away, there's no time to rest. And this is something we'll see with Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anh. Like when he'll go from one place to another, conquer one part of the part of Arabia or one land, and then he'll quickly move on to somewhere else and go somewhere else, and he will keep on moving. And this was something he would continuously do. And so Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu an is told by Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu an to make his way and go to Iraq. And so prior to going to Iraq, Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu an writes a letter to Hurmuz. Hurmuz was the leader of the Persian army that was in one of the places waiting for the enemy to come. And just to give you some idea of the Persian Empire, because this was many, many years ago, thousands of years ago, or over 1,000 years ago. The Persian Empire was the most powerful empire at the time. It was like, greater than the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire would be at war with one another for over 1,000 years. There was constant war between them. And the Persian Empire, they say, was even greater than the Roman Empire. We hear about the Roman Empire all the time because we're from this part of the world. So we hear about the Roman Empire. People study the Roman Empire in schools and in history. We don't really read much about the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire began in the 6th century BC, before Christ, before the birth of Isa alayhi salam. 6th century, 600 years before. And it ended in the 7th century, so over 1,000 years. An empire that stretched over 1,000 years. And some say it was even longer than this, maybe around 1,300 years. A huge empire. And it basically began from Greece in Europe all the way to Iran, Iraq and Iran, India, Persia, Persia will consist of India, Pakistan, those areas. It was all India in those days. All of this land, all of this area belonged to the Persian Empire. And then, of course, you had other parts of Europe and Damascus, etc., belonging to the Roman Empire. Sham, the Levant area, belonging to the Roman Empire. So it was a huge empire. It was very powerful. And they were known to construct like the most amazing buildings. There was a place called Ctesiphon. And this is another battle which Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu was going to be involved in. It was like one of the wonders of the world at the time. There were these huge pillars that were constructed. We don't even know how they were done. Huge pillars that were constructed, huge buildings that were constructed by the Persian Empire, by their kings. And of course, when the Muslims conquered it, it was like amazing for them to see. They were amazed by how huge these buildings were, and it was almost like the pyramids in Egypt. The way that they were constructed, it boggled the mind how they were able to do this. But the point is, the Persian Empire, I'm just trying to give you an idea of how huge and how powerful this empire was. They were always fighting with the Roman Empire. Even in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the Persians ended up defeating decisively the Romans. And it's even mentioned in the Quran. Alif Lam Mim, Ghulibat al-Rum. The Romans have been defeated in the lowest part of the land, referring to the Persian Empire, defeating the Romans in a specific battle. And it was a huge victory for the Persians. The point is, it was something which was, it was a huge empire at the time. In the time of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, it had been around for many, many centuries. And as a result of the dua of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, the Persian Empire basically crumbled. So a letter was sent to the Persian leader. the Kisra of Persia, the king of Persia, and the king was insulted. He ripped up the letter of the Prophet ﷺ. When news came to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, may Allah rip up his kingdom. May Allah rip up his empire. And a short time later, the son of the king rebels and conspires to kill his own father. He imprisons his own father and kills his own father. And then he kills the son. He ends up killing any male relatives that he has that might be a threat to his kingship. His own siblings and people are close to him. He ends up killing them all. Like about 10 people, they say. And of course, when you do this, you just isolated yourself as well. You don't even have that much support anyway. And they say he was the leader for a few months, maybe 6-7 months, and then he himself was killed, and the Persian Empire, as the Prophet ﷺ had predicted and had said, it basically was torn to pieces, torn to shreds, and this was the dua of the Prophet ﷺ coming to fruition when it came to the Persian Empire and the end of the Persian Empire. So Khalid ibn Walid, before he arrives in Iraq, he sends a letter to the leader of the Persian Empire, or the Persian army that was stationed ready and waiting for the Muslims. And it was a warning. Khalid ibn Walid gave the instructions, embrace Islam or pay the jizya. And then he says, save yourself from death. Indeed, I have come to you with a people who love death just as you love life. And again, this is to prepare them, psychologically. When you hear about an army coming and they're not interested in staying alive, they love death just like you love life. It plays on a person's mind. And Khalid was hoping to put some fear into Hurmuz's heart and into the fear into the army itself. But of course, it didn't really happen. They stayed in their place. They didn't retreat or anything. Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anh continues to engage the enemy. And this battle became known as the Battle of Dhatus Salasil, the Battle of the Chains. And some say that the reason why it was called the Battle of the Chains is because the enemy, they would chain themselves together. So one person would be chained with the person next to him. Why? So that they wouldn't run away. So if you were going in one direction and you were fighting, there was no way you could retreat. It was just a case of fighting and going forward and staying ahead and going ahead and continuing to fight without having to retreat or run away. So they say this is why it was called Dhatus Salasil. And Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu, when he arrived on the scene, he made camp at the best place that he could find. And the enemy was already there, but there was no water source. And he was left with one choice, and that was to try to win over the water source of the enemy. And so he told his army, put down your heavy supplies and fight them for the water source. And the one who is the most patient and the most noble of the armies will gain control of the water source. So the Muslims unload their heavy supplies, and the horsemen stood their ground, and the infantry are about to march forward. And by the mercy and grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a single cloud appears, and rain starts to go on the rows of the Muslim soldiers. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts to bring down rain. And they all drank from the water, from the rainwater, and they were able to gain their strength before they fought the enemy. And this was a blessing and a miracle that was given to the Muslims at this, or just prior to this battle, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And before the actual battle took place, a mubaraza took place. Mubaraza is when there's a duel before the actual battle. By the way, Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anh, he also did mubaraza and challenged people for duels at the Battle of Yamama, which we just mentioned. And he came forward at the Battle of Yamama and asked, who is there who wants to duel me? And one man came forward, and he fought him and he killed him. And another man came forward, he fought him and killed him. Third man came, and Khalid ibn Walid fought him and killed him. And in this war, in this battle, Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anh, again, was prepared for any kind of duel that anybody wished to have against him. Hurmuz himself, the general of the Persian army, challenges Khalid to a duel. So Hurmuz makes his way forward, but Hormuz has no intention of actually fighting against Khalid. What's his plan? His plan is to bring Khalid closer to the Persian army because they have to come to the middle. His plan was to bring him closer, set up a trap, and have him killed by some of his soldiers. And once he's killed Khalid, the rest of the army will be demoralized. So, as the soldiers are meeting, facing each other, Khalid comes forward, Hormuz comes forward, and they start to exchange blows, after which Khalid seems to grab Hormuz into some kind of grapple and some kind of lock, and Hormuz's guards end up surrounding Khalid ibn al-Walid. And even in their presence, Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anhu is still focused on trying to kill Hormuz. So he's aware of what's going on, but he's thinking, I need to kill Hormuz. And meanwhile, while this is happening, the Muslims are noticing what's going on, that there's some kind of trap taking place. Al-Qa'qa' was another companion of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His name was Al-Qa'qa' ibn Amr. Al-Qa'qa' from the ranks notices what's happening. He's watching every move. And he sees the Persian soldiers and the Persian guards trying to go around Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu. So he springs into action and he goes and he starts fighting the guards of Hormuz. The guards that are trying to kill Khalid ibn al-Walid. He goes with a few men and he ends up fighting the guards, engaging the guards so that they can't fight Khalid ibn al-Walid. Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anh ends up killing Hormuz. And the battle begins and the Muslims are victorious at this battle. And if it wasn't for Al-Qa'qa' on that day, at that point in time, Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anh may have been killed. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh, he said that an army does not lose when it contains the likes of this man, the likes of Al-Qa'qa' radiallahu anh. And this is another example of a battle that Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anh was involved in and participated in his lifetime. And they say that the war booty from this battle was so much that they needed 100 camels to load the war booty. So the weapons and the armor of the soldiers in this battle was so much, they needed 100 camels to be able to load all of this war booty onto. And of course, it was sent to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh, as was the tradition. 1/5 would be sent to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and to Medina. And from the things which Khalid radiallahu anh had sent for Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh was a hood that belonged to Hormuz. So it was a very expensive and luxurious, high quality hood that he sent to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh. And Abu Bakr as-Siddiq sent it back to Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anh. He sent it back to him and he told him, this is a reward for your brave feats on the battlefield. And so he was given this hood by Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh, and it turned out to be worth 100,000 dinar, which is like, yeah, it's a lot of money. So in today's time, it'll be over £1 million. It'll be over £1 million. So it was a very, very expensive hood, and it was embroidered with valuable jewels. It was like one of those very expensive hoods that was made in Persia. Persia, of course, are known for their rugs also, and those kinds of quality items. So these are just some of the examples of the battles which Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anh led and was involved in. And inshallah, next lesson that we have, we will speak about some other incidents related to Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anh, and we'll speak about Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh, and the end of his khilafah and his death, and the appointment of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh. So many things you could mention about Khalid ibn Walid. You could talk about, you could have a whole series on Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anh just by himself. There's so many things that happened. There's a story which is mentioned that as he was conquering land for the Muslims, he was traveling with his army and he happened to be passing by Mecca. So he's not in Mecca or in that area, but he's north of Mecca, but he's passing by and he's going to another location that was given to him on the instructions of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq to continue fighting and continue the battles. And Khalid ibn Walid takes a couple of his friends, and it was Hajj season, so he decides secretly, while the army is going, to quickly go to Mecca, perform Hajj, okay, hoping that nobody will see him, try to disguise himself, and then catch up with the army and continue going to the battle that he was supposed to go to. Like it's as if it's not enough to go from one place to another to fight. He must do Hajj as well. So he sends the army forward. He goes. A few of them, they go to Mecca. They perform Hajj, and one of the people recognizes Khalid ibn Walid. And he's thinking, what's he doing here? He's supposed to be fighting with the army. So he tells Abu Bakr Siddiq. He tells him, I saw Khalid ibn Walid performing Hajj. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anh sends a letter to Khalid ibn Walid. And by now he's joined the army again. He's continuing to fight the next battle. And Abu Bakr Siddiq congratulates him on the Hajj and tells him, don't ever do that again. Don't ever do that again. Don't ever leave the army. Don't ever, go against my instructions again. So, this is the kind of character that Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anh was. And inshallah, we'll speak next lesson about a few more examples of Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anh in battle and some of the sacrifices that he made and some of his strategies that he implemented in some of these battles, inshallah. And with that, we'll be concluding for today. Any questions before we conclude? I mean, that's generally what happens, if you need, for example, medical attention, you would have the women who would care to tend to the soldiers who were injured and for food, etc. So that wasn't uncommon. جزاكم الله خير سبحانك اللهم بحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته